A military coup in Sudan is drawing international condemnation and threatening the flow of foreign aid that's been a lifeline to the economy. Countries are throwing their support behind thousands of protesters calling for free and fair elections. Military leaders have promised a swift transition to democracy, but demonstrators accuse them of a power grab. The resultant political crisis is threatening to derail Sudan's budding economic recovery. Mobin Nasir reports.
Water cannon, tear gas and even live bullets aren't deterring these protesters. Tens of thousands of Sudanese are taking to the streets, accusing the military of monopolizing the country's wealth.
The military is controlling most of the state's institutions. We're here to ask for a transition to democracy.
The time of military rule has come to an end. We want elections in line with the constitutional declaration.
On Monday, the military deposed and arrested Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok and other leaders and declared a state of emergency.
We're taking steps that preserve the path of the magnificent December Revolution until its final goals are achieved, and arriving at a completely civilian state through free and transparent elections.
Hamdok, a former UN economist, had come to power just 2 months earlier. Along with the head of the military, he was entrusted with organizing general elections. He was also leading efforts to revive an economy battered by civil war and curb rocketing food prices. Analysts say the international funding secured by Hamdok is now at risk, along with the economic progress achieved.
It leaves Sudan potentially extremely isolated, going back into a period of being shunned by the rest of the world, and in particular, not having the type of international financial assistance and development cooperation that would be essential for economic stabilization and improving the life chances of Sudanese.
The UN has condemned the military coup, and the US, Sudan's biggest donor, has halted $700 million in aid to the country, demanding a return to civilian rule.
Those funds were intended to support the country's democratic transition as we evaluate the next step for Sudan programming.
Other international donors may also pull the plug. 1 in 3 Sudanese is already living below the poverty line, and almost 20% of the population is unemployed. If the military doesn't cede power soon, the unfolding constitutional and economic crises could destroy the livelihoods of millions of Sudanese. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
Let's get more on this now with Ahmed Soliman in London. He's a research fellow with the Africa program at Chatham House. Welcome to the program, Ahmed. So mass protests against Sudan's longtime leader, Omar al-Bashir, led to his ouster 2 years ago. But now we're seeing protests against this military coup. Can you explain to us, why are we seeing this military takeover right now?
What we've had over the last couple of years was a negotiated coalition government between the military forces, those who ousted Bashir back in 2019, and the civilian forces who were protesting on the street, those political parties, an alliance of political parties that were representing them. And that coalition has held together. At times it's been quite rocky. But in recent months, what we've seen is a deterioration in relations between the civilian and the military elements of the power-sharing transitional government. And that has led to this coup taking place a day ago now. And the feeling is that the military has fueled recent turmoil and set the stage for a takeover, including by having a hand in a foiled coup last month, by orchestrating demonstrations, calling for the military to sack the civilian administration and assume responsibility for the transition, which has, of course, now taken place, and for enabling or not intervening in a crippling blockade of the country's port in Port Sudan and the eastern part of the country. We've seen a new coalition of political parties emerging, splitting the civilian alliance as well. So this build-up of tensions has seemed to suggest that a hostile takeover by the military was on the cards. Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok, who is currently in detention, had been searching to try and find a compromise to rebuild some consensus between the sides. But there are, many different interests at stake within the country, so finding that consensus has been elusive.
So, although Sudan remains in a deep economic crisis, it had been receiving more international support since Omar al-Bashir was ousted in 2019. But as we heard, the US has now cut a key $700 million economic lifeline to the country. What sort of an impact will that have on Sudan's battered economy?
Well, I think this is a notice to the military in Sudan. Sudan's economic recovery has been and is very reliant on international support, and key donors, including the US, the EU, the United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF, have made it very clear that their continued support and engagement is contingent on the political transition moving forward. Now, it has stalled, and the US has shown by immediately pausing its economic assistance to Sudan that with the transition having stalled, the support will also stall, and the EU and others are expected to follow suit. We've obviously seen strong condemnation from across the international community, from the African Union as well. The African Union has been meeting, and there is a thought that Sudan may once again become suspended from the African Union. The Troika, group of international countries very closely following affairs in Sudan and South Sudan, have issued a very strongly worded statement calling this a betrayal of the revolution. So the international community has made its position fairly clear, and there could be increased sanction on the country moving forward, economically and otherwise.
Okay, Ahmed Soliman from Chatham House. Really good to get your analysis. Thank you again for joining us on the program.